How would you feel about having a nuclear power plant on your doorstep?
Well, that's an idea that many Australians, like these students in Lithgow, might need to get comfy with.
Having a nuclear power plant in my community would, in a way, it would benefit some business because it is a new industry that would bring in new jobs and new opportunities here.
However, I do fear, just always at the back of my mind, one thing to go wrong, we won't have a town or a community anymore.
They're just a handful of the thousands of people across 7 different towns who would eventually have a nuclear neighbour, built on the sites of old coal-fired power plants if the coalition wins the next election.
With a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 and the clock ticking for coal-fired power stations in Australia, both major parties have been busy butting heads over climate policy and sustainable energy.
The government's current game plan relies on renewables like wind, solar and hydrogen, backed up by batteries and natural gas.
But Peter Dutton and the coalition reckon that plan will leave us in the dark.
No other country in the world can keep the lights on 24/7 with the renewables only policy. We need to make sure that our economy can function 24/7, and we can only do that with a strong baseload power.
That is where Mr. Dutton says nuclear generation should step in, alongside renewables and natural gas.
Nuclear power plants work by using a process called fission. That's when a uranium atom is split in two, releasing a huge amount of energy in the form of heat and radiation. Rods of uranium fuel sit in large vessels of water, and the fission reaction boils the water, generating steam. That spins a turbine to generate electricity, all while producing almost no greenhouse gases.
But that isn't the only use for nuclear fission.
Yeah, atomic bombs showed the world what nuclear fission is really capable of. And teamed with some catastrophic nuclear power plant disasters, like Chernobyl in 1986 and Fukushima in 2011, which spread dangerous radioactive material into the environment, Aussies haven't been keen on the idea. In 1998, the government actually banned nuclear power here altogether.
I can see why people are worried about it with the past events that nuclear power has created.
If anything was to go wrong, it wouldn't be a little mistake, and it could be quite detrimental to a lot of people's health and well-being.
I'm used to living with a nuclear power plant. I mean, I was on top of one, so I was more interested in safety than anybody else.
This is Honorary Associate Professor Tony Irwin from ANU, who has operated nuclear power plants in the UK for more than 30 years.
We haven't had an accident to a reactor built in the last 30 years. It's only the very old ones that are the problem. And a modern reactor would have survived even Fukushima.
Fukushima was really worrying because Japan is a modern, sophisticated society. They have a decent regulatory framework, but still things went badly wrong.
And this is Emeritus Professor Ian Lowe from Griffith University, a former member of the Australian Radiation Health and Safety Advisory Council and former president of the Australian Conservation Foundation.
If I was backed into a corner with a broken beer bottle and the only choice was nuclear or coal, I would probably go with nuclear. But now that solar farms and wind turbines are much cheaper than nuclear, without having any of the problems, I can't see any reasonable case for building nuclear power stations in Australia.
A key question for many is what happens to the radioactive waste when the reactor fuel is spent?
The most common practice around the world is to bury it deep underground.
We've successfully managed waste for 70 years without harm to any people in the environment.
But it's still a concern for some, like residents in Port Augusta.
It just feels like so many things could go wrong. Like, how is the waste produced? Where do we put the waste? Is it going to be on Aboriginal land? And the general community definitely doesn't want the power plant to be inside the community.
But despite what The Simpsons might show us,
I don't think people will be negatively affected at all, as long as it's done well and safely.
I think the three-eyed fish really is a work of fiction. It would be possible to manage those risks if nuclear were the only option.
It's not just about safety. There are arguments that the reactors couldn't be built by the time we'll need them. that they'll cost way too much money, that even if the federal ban is lifted, states with their own bans like Queensland and New South Wales might not want to, and the number of proposed nuclear reactors won't actually generate the power that we need.
If there were 5 large reactors and 2 small modular reactors, if they existed by the time we want to build them, would only produce about 10 gigawatts of electricity. We need about 100 gigawatts of electricity to get to zero emissions.
There isn't one absolute technology that's the best. I think renewables, particularly things like rooftop solar, are really good. I think it's a mistake to have solar in, taking up farmland. And when I see, a 100-foot high steel tower with a 16,000 ton of concrete base and an 80-meter blade, and it produces 4 megawatts on a good day, I think that's not fantastic engineering, really.
As well as reducing carbon emissions, nuclear power has other significant advantages, like providing more jobs in regional areas, and a long-lasting, reliable and stable source of energy that takes up less land than coal-fired power stations or renewables.
We'll find out more about the Coalition's nuclear plan in the lead up to the election next year. But for now, people in these towns have a lot to say.
It could give a lot of jobs, but is there anyone in Port Augusta who's qualified to work at a nuclear power plant?
Future of our town, if everything went according to plan, I think it would become a once again booming community, such as during the mining days.
As a small country town, we need those more job opportunities.
Personally, I do support it, only for the fact that it is beneficial and it is clean as long as it's run well and it's run safely.
I don't think it's wise to just focus on one. I feel like we need to make sure that we're still focusing on one's work.
Australia should focus on solar power, and Port Augusta's pretty empty. And Australia's a desert after all. We get plenty of sunlight.